Okay, in this week's video, we're going to be talking about how to photograph abandoned architecture, aka urbex photography. Let's do this. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is James Kerwin, and this is me. I'm an architecture and interior photographer from the UK, and I love shooting abandoned places, relics, ruins, hidden gems and ghost towns, as well as off the beaten path locations all around the world. I'm posting new videos every Sunday, so why don't you join me for the ride by subscribing. You can also check out my website in the description below. For those of you that are new around here, my name is James Kerwin, as you heard in the intro, and I've been photographing places like this for around about, well, 9 years at this point. 2013 I started photographing these places, so hopefully, you would hope anyway, fingers crossed, that I'm in a good position to be able to give you some tips and tricks on getting started or even photographing these locations. Let's crack on. Okay, so these days it's much easier actually to find locations than it was back in 2013. However, some of the same basics do apply, and it's not every day, unfortunately, that we find an abandoned theatre, a stunning abandoned theatre, say in the heart of Italy. They are out there. The best tips that I can give you on this, the first sort of part of this, finding locations, is to dive into the forums. Go out there, do some basic Google researches first of all, and look at some of the forums. I've linked some of them down below that you can go to, you can check them out. Facebook groups, forums such as 28 Days Later, and other European forums as well. This can give you a great starting point. There is a community though of photographers creating great art all over the world, and I would say the best thing to do to start off with is to reach out to some of them, or at least get inspiration from some of those people. They can be a great resource as to finding locations or getting inspiration in terms of photography styles and how it is that you would like to go ahead and photograph. Maybe you could meet some people as well, which leads me nicely on to the next point. Start to mingle with people, talk to people in those forums. Maybe see if you can get invited out onto trips, and once you do that, of course, once you sort of put yourself across, your best version of yourself across, you should be able to then start meeting people, and maybe they'll trust you with the locations that they've found as well, and you can kind of swap. Another thing to do is, of course, the compulsory Google research. And everyone will tell you, yeah, you've got to find it on Google. Well, that's true actually. Many locations, including the one that I'm standing in today, I found just by simple Google researches. Usually in a local language, not actually in the language of English, but you can try both. You can try multiple different languages as well. Of course, most pages can be translated using, say, Google Chrome or a browser, right-clicking, translating, and it can give you then a basis as to where it is. At least it will give you a head start. Okay, so going prepared. What are you going to take with you? Well, gloves might be a great starting point, as well as actually, believe it or not, a face covering as well would be something that you could consider in these kind of places. There's a lot of grime and nasty paint, as well as asbestos in some places. It's worth considering taking a mask with you as well. Shouldn't be too difficult to obtain. The other thing to consider as well, aside from the essential camera, of course, is as well a torch. Some of these locations are really dark, especially if you're there later in the evening because you've had nasty lighting conditions or something like this. Taking a torch with you is an essential piece of kit. I'd say about 90% of the work on my website and in my portfolio is shot using a tripod. Now, it goes without saying that these locations can be quite dark. Sometimes they can be quite harsh and difficult lighting conditions. Images that I shoot at these locations can be any shutter speed, but it does tend to be on the longer side. Anywhere between, I don't know, a fifth of a second and up to 20 or even 30 seconds. For that, you're going to want something like this, a tripod. You don't need anything fancy. You could just use a really lightweight, small pop-up tripod like this one. This is a Benro one, but you could use any Manfrotto, do a similar one, for example. A nice pop-up, small tripod that fits on the side of your camera bag. Not much to carry around. The head can even come off to help you carry it through, say, for example, fields to get to the location, and you can pop that in the camera bag. And, of course, it then doesn't weigh a lot overall. For those instances where you do not have a tripod, I recommend a fast type lens, a prime lens or something like 2.8, f2.8 and below. That'll give you sharper results. It'll allow more light into the sensor and give you a faster shutter speed generally. However, most portfolio level work is shot on a tripod. Now, I'm not the type of photographer that believes that you are only a pro and a serious photographer if you shoot in manual mode all of the time. However, The challenge comes in these spaces that you want to control every aspect of your settings when you're taking your images to get the best results. And for that, unfortunately, it does mean learning and practicing with manual mode. There is instances where aperture priority might be a go-to. You could dial in, say, f8 and let the camera choose the shutter speeds. But realistically, to get the best optimum results, I recommend using manual mode. One of the tips I have for you for this is actually, if you've got a camera with live view, pop it onto live view and you can then see as the camera is kind of exposing, as you dial in your settings, what it's doing to the results. Cameras like the Canons and also some Olympuses and Fujifilms do allow that auto preview to come along. Mirrorless cameras as well. Unfortunately, some of the Nikon older brands especially, and some of the Sony ones do not, I believe. However, correct me if I'm wrong, write it in the comments below. And normally, to get the best, sharpest results here, you want to crack down on your aperture. You want to get nice sharp aperture, something like f8, f7.1, f9, get the sharpest throughout the image in the frame. But you also then want to control the shutter speed as well to make sure there's enough light coming into the scene. So for this instance, it is worth, like I said, shooting in manual. However, try aperture priority and see if you like the results. So to some, these places might be a little bit spooky. Trust me, they're not. However, one thing that they are is static. These locations don't move, say like when you're shooting portrait photography. So that's a great thing because it allows you to then slow down and capture images and get results that you're happy with. Take your time. So because the location is static or the building doesn't move, it's a great time to play with perspectives and angles and really try and break the rules when it comes to composition as well. Have a little play around. Have a look in your camera, like I said on live view earlier on, and see if you can get some interesting perspectives. Perhaps you can get your camera lower down or play it into a corner and shoot from there and shoot across the room. There's just some ideas for you. But of course, this section's about symmetry. Try and get some symmetry in camera. Look at leading lines. Look at the way that your eye is drawn into the center or to the side of an image and try to focus on those compositions. So very few abandoned buildings have electricity or even natural light that is great. So maybe it's a great idea to create some of your own. Think about the flashlight I told you to bring in your toolkit. You could add that into some of your shots and create some interesting looking results. So for example, by boosting your ISO, your artificial lighting camera, that is the ISO, you could actually like boost it to say 800 and then light paint the scene if it's a completely dark environment. It's a technique that I've had to do before. So I had to do this technique in Lebanon in a theatre, and I had to do multiple images to stitch it together to actually make this result. But all of it is light painted in exactly this manner using ISO 800 or just under. But of course, if you were listening to my last tips, a tripod is necessary, meaning when you're on a tripod, you should be able to get a longer exposure in those dark spaces. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is limit the amount of motion blur or any blur in the images at all. So a wide-angle lens can make your subject, in architecture especially, much more commanding. On a 35mm camera, you're going to want something the equivalent of 14 minimum, probably up to 35mm range. I think on a crop sensor camera, that's something along the lines of 11 to 24mm, and that's going to give you a nice wide shot. The kit lenses that come with some cheaper cameras unfortunately start at 18mm, and that isn't going to give you a great result on a crop sensor camera. Below in the description, I'm going to give you some crop sensor cameras that are affordable and to get you started, and also I'm going to give you some full frame cameras as well, and the equivalent lenses that match up. These lenses can also bring your audience into the scene. Of course, a wide-angle lens can add drama and entice a sense of emptiness and isolation to your images. Wide shots are also especially helpful if you're in a confined space and you wish to project vastness to your audience. Staircases always make for interesting photos. Every time I post a set online, they get a great response, and for a reason. Usually they have great character, shape and design, but don't be fooled, photographing them can be tricky. Perhaps try a 2-point perspective on these, keeping the corner of the room in the centre of the frame, giving you 2 walls on the finished image or in your viewfinder. Here's a couple of examples that come from my portfolio. The other thing to look out for is vegetation or overgrown areas. This can make for some really interesting images, nature taken back and all that. Keep a lookout for areas with trees, shrubs, etc. growing. It can make for some really interesting imagery in these spaces. Here's a couple of examples from my back catalogue, including this greenhouse, this stained glass chapel, Gothic chapel in the south of France, and finally this little outhouse, or no, again, a little greenhouse in Italy. I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, please leave a comment in the description below. Of course, I'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, I hope you get out your cameras and of course, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.